Happy Friday to everyone out there in SADS Live Land. And number 90 today. It's great to have you with us. It's Friday, April 22nd, 2022. And I'm Mike Ackerman, genetic cardiologist here at the Mayo Clinic and director of Mayo Clinic's Windland Smith Rice Genetic Heart Rhythm Clinic and the Windland Smith Rice Sudden Death Genomics Laboratory. And as on almost every Friday, shifting to every other Friday, it's great to be with you on behalf of Alice Laura. I give you a greeting from her, the CEO of our SADS Foundation. As you know, SADS Foundation is the Sudden Arrhythmia Death Syndrome Foundation. We're all about Stop SADS. So you can find us on either www.sads.org or stopsads.org if you'd like to think about it that way. Our mission is to enable our families, and many of you have joined us and are coming on. I can't wait to see who's with us live today, to live and thrive despite the presence of your sudden death predisposing genetic heart rhythm condition. We don't try to hide the fact that sudden death is a possibility, but the reality is that when you're diagnosed properly, when you're treated properly, that tragedy basically almost never happens to our families. That's the good news. We still have work to do to prevent that first tragedy from ever happening. And so wherever you're joining us from, this is a bonus day. Normally we would have been next week, but next week, Friday, April 29th, will be at Heart Rhythm Society, and all the SADS team will be there in San Francisco, learning and gathering and connecting with people together, side by side, and maybe not even with the mask on in the convention center. We'll see what the rules are over there in San Francisco. And maybe when I fly over there, I won't have to wear the mask on the plane. I don't know what Delta Airlines is currently doing, but that would be quite an experience. I was mask-free in Copenhagen, Denmark, when we landed in their airport 2 weeks ago for the European Heart Rhythm Association meeting, which was fantastic. Well, the reason we don't know is because the pandemic, as many of you know, is starting to get behind us. Let me show you something. I think this is pretty encouraging. See that? Wow, that peak over there was kind of like, let's see, yeah. December 2021, January 22, Omicron territory, where many of us, yours truly, got Omicron, and many of us, despite being fully vaccinated. And that spike came, and it was a very aggressive version of the virus, of the SARS-CoV-2 that causes COVID-19, but less severe overall. And so it has gone through where it's gone through and has rapidly come down. Rates in hospitals are way lower, so people are cautiously encouraged, hopefully, but still do the right things where it makes sense to do those things. We're still masked in Mayo Clinic when we're going to and with our patients. I don't know how long that will be, but we have these available. And so we'll find out there. We are mask-free in non-patient care areas. So that's a recent change. So that's encouraging to see that the signals are there to start to get back to normal. So hopefully you're getting back to normal. It was and is, this virus, a big deal. 508 million cases worldwide, 500 million. 6.2 million global deaths in the United States. We're not at 1 million deaths yet, but we're closing in 991,000 deaths attributed to COVID-19. I think one of the things that's been good news, and a question came in, is in these 2 years of the pandemic, we didn't know for sure whether this virus and the intersection between the virus and your long QT, Brugada, CPVT, ARVC, HCM substrate would agree with each other or disagree with each other. And it's been encouraging to see that there's been no signal of increased triggering of your genetic heart substrate if you got either infected by the virus or if you got vaccinated for COVID-19. Neither are QT dangerous, Brugada dangerous, CPVT dangerous overall. So that's been good. We know that the most important thing we should be doing is whether infected by a virus that produces fever or getting a vaccine that may cause fever, that if you get fever, lower fever. And that due diligence is about all the extra precautions that we need to take. So it's been good to see that there's been no increase of long QT events, Brugada events, CPVT events during these past 2 years of the pandemic compared to the 2 years before the pandemic, for example. So bonus day today for us to be together to do your questions. Next week, we're at Heart Rhythm Society, and then we're back again for podcast SADS Live 91, 2 weeks from today on May 6th. Well, let's see what questions have come on in because I can't wait to have. Oh, one other thing that's, I think, a fun extra is we just wrapped up an hour ago a 2-day visit from Dr. Andrew Cron, who's the incoming president of Heart Rhythm Society and has been chief of cardiology for over 10 years over in Vancouver in Canada. And we had a wonderful time with him as our third Winland Smith Rice cardiovascular genomics visiting professor. Great time, great guy. And that follows the second 2.5 years ago, the great Chris Simsarian down under, and our very, very first Arthur Wilda. So names that many of our SADS families are aware of and who have been on SADS Live. Let's see what's come on in. And so I'll look on the side, pithy questions so I can glance and go. And thanks for putting these up, Aaron. Aaron, who is critical on our staff, does a great job. So does Anna. We have an amazing team that our CEO Alice leads, and they're there for you, and they care for you deeply. Rachel, you get number 1. For someone newly diagnosed, is once a year EP appointment adequate? And that's a great question, Rachel. And the short answer is it depends. Not a one size fits all. If your disease is easy, low risk, slam dunk, once a year might be too often. Might not need to see you. I see some of my patients every 3 to 5 years. Other patients newly diagnosed, I'm concerned. I'm not sure we have our treatment in place well enough yet. CPVT, I don't like their stress test. I might be seeing that patient next month again. And so it all depends on your disease presentation, your disease risk category. And we range from seeing some patients monthly to other patients every 3 to 5 years. And hi, Michelle. And Rachel gets questioned. Rachel gets 2 in a row. Wow, that's bonus. So this is just for you. Don't tell anybody that I've taken 2 of your questions in a row. Does the virus or the medicines treated with cause long QT numbers? Well, actually, the data does show that the SARS-CoV-2 virus in non-long QT people causes a mild degree of QT lengthening. And that was one of the reasons why we thought that in long QT people, if you have additional lengthening of your QT by the virus itself, maybe we're going to see more events. Never materialize, which is great. And probably the reason is that if you're well treated, we have a lot of margin. We have a lot of safety against a variety of QT insults. And that's why we even have long QT patients where we actually let them be treated under careful review with medicines that might even be on the QT hit list. So that list is very important. No one is supposed to put you on those medicines without good reason and good review and good permission. But it does show us that when you're well treated, we probably have a lot of safety margin. Now, the medicines used to treat long QT syndrome, or the medications used to treat SARS-CoV-2 infection, Omicron version, whatever, stealth Omicron, COVID-19, those medications, every current medication and every current vaccine is QT safe. Another piece of good news. And Amanda, you're welcome. Oh, and I'm sorry to hear about your son. Her son passed away in January from a cardiac arrest, then was diagnosed with Brugada. Mom, Amanda diagnosed. Your cardiologist is not sure if you need an ICD as you're 35, never suffered an attack. Would you recommend I ask for one? It's reasonable to think about that, but very importantly, in our diseases, almost all of them, not hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, not that one, but long QT, Brugada, CPVT, the story of tragedy in your family, in any of those families, tragic for sure, emotionally intense, unbelievable, predicting of risk for you, meaning the other living relatives, not at all, almost not at all. So I would never install a defibrillator in you for your genetic diagnosis of Brugada just because of your son's tragedy and your tragedy because of your son's passing. I'd be looking at your story. How does it show? How does the Brugada, show itself in your body? And if I don't like the appearance, then it doesn't matter whether there's been a death in the family or not a death in the family. If I think it's weak and wimpy in your body, then we would for sure never install a defibrillator just because of the tragedy that occurred in a family member. I wish you well with that, Amanda. Victoria's question number 4 today. So she can tell my voice doesn't sound quite right. It's my granddaughter's fault. So I think she gave me what is called the normal cold. And because she came for Easter and had a runny nose. But speaking of my granddaughter, and since Victoria's wondering the reason why, there she is, Easter 2022 at just past 2 years old. And to show you, isn't it amazing how time flies? Easter 2021 at just past 1 year old. So she gave it to me. It's her fault. It is called the normal virus, and I'm doing well. Thank you. Yeah, good question and follow-up. What do I recommend as counsel for those of us who are part of a family where there's relatives living in denial and not being treated for their long QT syndrome? Great question. Our genetic counselors are challenged by this all the time. You know, as they say, you can lead them to the water, you can't make them drink. And all families can do is do their absolute best to inform them and their relatives. I often will tell the families, if you're comfortable giving my consultation note, for example, to the families and highlight the section where I describe what to do for the rest of the family, that's a way to take you off the hook, because they're the marching orders, if you will, are right there. And it's just, being patient with them. Judgment. I often tell families who will tell me in clinic, I didn't get vaccinated. For those who didn't get vaccinated, I said, wait a second. You're in an okay place. It's safe here. This is a judgment-free zone. We're talking about your health. Let's try to understand, why haven't you been vaccinated? Maybe there's some reasons that don't hold up, and maybe we can discuss them, and maybe afterwards you'll choose to get vaccinated. Same thing with families with long QT or Brugada, where they may or may not want to get genetically tested. I can tell and I encourage families that the only deaths, with very few exceptions, and I can count them on two fingers, that have occurred in our program have occurred in distant relatives where those relatives either weren't told about the genetic marker that could be tested for and, if found, treated very, very well, or received the news and didn't act on it. And either of that resulted in relatives who were unknown, undiagnosed, and therefore untreated when their tragedy occurred. So I don't use that as a scare tactic to encourage them, but I do point it out that when we know it's there, life goes on and life is almost completely normal. When we don't get to know whether it's there or not, then we don't get to intercept the perfect storm and prevent the next tragedy or the first tragedy. Allie gets the next question, and her son was 18, going home in the taxi, just fell asleep in his sister's arms, said he died with SADS, still can't deal with it. 14 years has gone by, no warning, nothing. And Allie, I'm so sorry, and it is so true. I have families where the tragedy occurred 14 years ago and they can instantaneously bring them back as if it was yesterday. And so we don't assume that the grieving process is one where you go through and by next month you're back on the horse fully and as if it was an afterthought. Not at all. It is the tragedy of death in the family, like what many of you, some of you have experienced, has not happened in my family. So I can't bring myself to that depth of despair, but having taken care of thousands of patients now where that tragedy has been your experience and having many of you share that with me, I think I can almost get myself to that dark, dark, awful, terrible, horrific place. But of course, I know I'm probably not even close to the depths of what you go through. I think your story of no warnings, no nothing is a reminder that for us at the SADS Foundation, we have a two-pronged approach. One is to get out the warning signs. You know, we've had various awareness months, and this month has been Brugada syndrome awareness. What are the warning signs? Long QT, what are the warning signs? When there's a faint, how do you tell if that was a danger faint, a warning faint versus who cares, no big deal faint? And so respect those warning signs, act on those warning signs. But there's the other half, like your family story, where you can ask and ask and think, and there's no warning signs. That tragic death that began that family's tragic journey is the first warning sign, was the first warning sign. And so that's why there's an ongoing effort to figure out how do we find those individuals where the death is going to be the only warning. And so that's bringing us in the world of screening. And some of you know there are screening ECGs set up in high schools and various communities and a lot of that, those strategies. But how do you screen for these conditions? And some incredible progress is being made with screening tools to try to identify the first person. So I hope in the months and years ahead, Allie, we make much more progress in that so that your family's story isn't one that has to be repeated very often. We have, I don't know if I'm going to pronounce it correctly, Joel Paula Martin. Hello. Is it possible for a 40-year-old male that have had dozens of EKGs and echoes still develop Brugada or long QT after that age? Thanks in advance. Almost for sure not. If you had important disease, that important disease should have been caught by those ECGs. Now, is it possible that you could have normal ECGs, but actually own a long QT genetic marker? Yes, but your risk is unbelievably low. So if a QT issue came out in age 45, an ECG that suddenly became positive, that almost for sure is called not genetic, but environmental changes where maybe you were sick and had vomiting and diarrheal illnesses and your potassium went south. And then they gave you a medicine called Zofran for the nausea and vomiting from your illness. And on top of low potassium and the nausea medication, you got an ECG because you weren't feeling well. You went to the emergency department, somebody got that, and it showed a QT prolongation for the first time ever, whereas your 15 prior ECGs did not. In other words, something needed to bring out the QT signal because natural you in a natural state, there is no concern. And then the next question is quinidine typically prescribed without a beta blocker? Yes, it is. We don't use quinidine very often. It's one of the oldest heart rhythm medications we have, not used very much at all. About the only disease in among our SADS families where we use it is Brugada syndrome, sometimes in an entity called PVC triggered VF, but mostly in Brugada syndrome. When we choose to use quinidine for Brugada syndrome, it's often quinidine all by itself medication. In the United States, we tend to add quinidine in a person with bad Brugada where they have a defibrillator and their defibrillator has been called into action because of their bad Brugada. And then we add quinidine to try to make it less likely for another Brugada spell to happen. In other countries, Israel, for example, they will see somebody who's fainted from what they think was the Brugada to blame, but instead of going straight to a defibrillator because of that faint, they treat that fainting episode person with quinidine and then watch and wait to see if the Brugada will rear its head again and break through the protection of the quinidine. So the immediate answer is if I use quinidine in a Brugada patient, I don't need to have them on a beta blocker. Sandy's, many members were misdiagnosed with long QT, yes, and given ICDs. I know, I hate that. Recently diagnosed with CPVT. Should our ICDs be removed when we take beta blockers? Well, that's a super complicated question, Sandy. It's a really good one. I would just say in general, what we've learned over the years is that in CPVT, we try very hard to leave the internal defibrillator on the sidelines, meaning not to implant. For those where the decision was already made to implant it, do we reconfigure everything and start over and treat them more in the current way without a defibrillator? And that answer is it depends. It depends on what's been that person's defibrillator experience. One complication after another complication after another, yes, we'll probably revise and rewrite history and do a do-over. High risk CPVT, where it wasn't unreasonable that somebody chose a defibrillator, we would just add what we call dual therapy, beta blocker and flecainide, and sometimes triple therapy, beta blocker, flecainide, and left cardiac sympathetic denervation, or LCSD, to the treatment plan to make sure we have their CPVT as neutralized as possible, and we have the scenario set up such that if the defibrillator were ever to get called into action, we maximize the likelihood that it would be a one shot and done and better, rather than the possibility of a so-called defibrillator electrical storm. So please don't just go out there and have somebody remove your defibrillator. You need to be cared for very, very carefully. And hello to the Chicago. Wow. And give a big hug, sir, to that incredible granddaughter of yours. If we knew grandkids were this, we would have had them. Yes. Uh, that's a true one. So great to see you. Grandchildren are amazing, and you made my day getting to read that. Leah is asking, I love your name, Leah. My mother's name is Leah, but added with an H on the end. And my niece, well, officially not my niece, but there's a very special person in my life here at Mayo Clinic where she's a new mom, 3-month-old baby now, and her name is Leah. So we have a Leah connection, but hers is spelled Lia. But for you, Miss Lea, Leah, can I talk a little bit about using a device like a live core at home and sending to our EPs for clinical use? Yes, I can talk about it. Full disclosure, Mayo Clinic and me and several inventors here at Mayo have been involved with AliveCore for the last 5+ years, working on creating QT knowledge into their device and getting closer. So she's referring to a device like this, and where you put your fingers on it, and there's a new generation one that is a better version because it gives more leads. But in time, and as soon as FDA approves it, the device will be FDA cleared as a QT meter. So where it will not just record the rhythm and tell you fast, slow, or a abnormal rhythm called atrial fibrillation, which our families often do not have, but it'll also flash your QT value. And so our families could monitor themselves to see, is their QT behaving well, or is it reacting to the illness they're having? Or if we made the decision to treat their mental health issue, anxiety, depression, with a antidepressant medication that is on the QT hit list, maybe they can self-check their QT, and if their QT is reacting, inform us. So there's a lot of effort going on to combine your periodic visit, whether it's monthly, yearly, or every 5 years, with ongoing remote surveillance and remote monitoring strategies to try to be always one step ahead or in front of these entities is going to be increasingly in focus with programs to try to anticipate, if you will, could we monitor in a way to see that the perfect storm is on the horizon and then intercept. Uh, and that's kind of out there a little bit, isn't it? Dr. Cron, who is here with us, as I mentioned earlier in the program, for the he and I referred to this from a movie that I like a lot, Minority Report, Tom Cruise. And in it, remember, he's all about seeing the murder that has not yet happened, but is going to happen, and then getting and arriving and disrupting it. So it's that kind of thought process with these remote monitoring strategies is, could we monitor and see alterations brewing in the electrical system before the macro event occurs? We're very early in that, but we're very excited about how that may change things. The lowest hanging next advance is having the AliveCore device approved as an FDA cleared device for the measurement and reporting of QT values. I think that's the immediate next step that is and should be on the horizon within the next months. It's been there at the FDA. Come on, FDA, let's do it and get this out there, because it will make a difference. So Amanda's wondering then what kind of treatment, and I will go. Questions have been picking up speed now. Oh, wow. I got to pick up speed. I didn't notice that they were accruing. So let's go fast question style. These are good ones, though. What kind of treatment would I recommend for a baby with Brugada and subsequent children? All depends. Many of my Brugada kids are on no treatment. Certain things we don't avoid, we don't do, and we avoid, and we lower fever. Most of our Brugada positive kids are just being monitored with preventative measures. and your daughter is going to be born on Monday. Congrats. That's so exciting. 50-50 chance. Don't be worried. When we know it, it's there. We can monitor it. There's zero risk in labor and delivery. Yes, she might have a 50-50 chance of inheriting the marker, but when we know it's there, we're really, really good. And Christina is going to be a month early as a CPVT patient. So I'm glad for your question. She has CPVT. The reason I said that is next month is CPVT Awareness Month. And I just want you to put that on your calendars. May 6th is going to be really good. And then May 20th is going to be really, really good because I'm going to be joined by a dear friend of mine, Dr. Shu Sanatani in Canada, another Canadian. And he is the head of the pediatric CPVT registry, and he and I have been doing lots together over the years. And he's going to join me, and we're going to do a tag team question and answer focused on CPVT. But for you, currently controlled on beta blocker, that's great. You've noticed more palpitations related to your menstrual cycle. Would hormonal birth control help this, or is it contraindicated? Great question. There's probably no clear evidence that there's a menstrual cycle rhythm correlation in CPVT, which is very different than what we have seen and are seeing in long QT women, especially women with LQT type 2. So, but we do know that normal palpitations in women, forget about CPVT or any genetic heart condition, for some women, their palpitations, which are normal, have a monthly cyclic variability. Some women, for example, can know that their period is going to be tomorrow because the palpitations that started the day before. For others, they kind of have an awareness that, yep, I'm about to ovulate because they can feel the PVCs or the normal skip beats. I'm not recommending that as an ovulation meter, but the point is, I doubt that your palpitations are your CPVT. I bet it's the normal background palpitations that are under hormonal control. And if there was need for hormone regulation with oral contraceptives, there's really no concern that oral contraceptives would be CPVT agitating. So I think that would be something to review with your physician. So looking at some dialogue on the side, Danielle's next up. Well, now you're challenging me, Danielle, with now shortened letters. You made it short, but I think SIL, I'm guessing, is that sister-in-law? 35 though, passed from long QT, and that's awful. And so did her daughter at age 14. The other two kids have had it as well and are on medicines. Is it likely they have a higher rate of death? They are scared every day. Actually, no. It's very important that the two living siblings are very well treated, because I'm betting that this is a family of LQT2. And in general, LQT2, all things considered, is a bit more aggressive in women than LQT1. And so we really need to be on our A game. So I would be treating them well, not because of the death of the sister at 14 or the mom at 35, but I would imagine their ECG may be obvious. Now, if their ECGs are not obvious, then perhaps their deceased sister's was, and that's the difference in it. And discussions about testing for Brugada families where a child has passed. And again, for those, Hillary, really it would be about, do we know the reason why? If the genetics has been established either by discovering it in the living or by doing a molecular autopsy in the one who tragically died, then that's the way we investigate a sudden death. It's really important in 2022 that for the tragedies of tomorrow, that we have those deaths examined incredibly carefully by a medical examiner, coroner, pathologist, forensic pathologist who knows what they're looking for at the heart, who can say, I know that the heart looks normal by my eyes and by my microscope, and then also retain a specimen to do postmortem genetic testing. And Leah's, I think for the resource question, your best resource is to connect with SADS to get the materials that we at SADS have built and provide for communities to use in thinking about SADS safe schools and the like. So work with the SADS Foundation. Rounding the corner with 4 minutes on the clock. Kelly's asking, what conditions do we do denervation for, or left cardiac sympathetic denervation? Works absolutely the best for type 1 long QT, type 2 long QT, and CPVT. We also use it for the rarer syndromes like the calmadulinopathies. We have not been as impressed with it working as well in LQT3. Other places in Europe have felt that it works in LQT3. We have not seen that, but that's probably because we've done the denervations in LQT3 in the worst of the worst. And when their LQT3 is that bad, we have a lot of work to do, and denervation's not good enough. But LQT1, LQT2, and CPVT, the three best in terms of denervations, what we call its anti-fibrillatory effect or its therapeutic protective effect. And I think Tanya might end up getting the last question because I've got to read. Oh, this is a long one, Tanya. My mother, myself, my two daughters and granddaughters have LQT1, only symptomatic one, and you had 3 cardiac arrests in 2 days. Your mom is scheduled for her second ablation for AFib. Is ablation dangerous in a long QT? Have had genetic testing done? No, there's no risk of the ablation for just because you have LQT1. It's a very low risk procedure. For many of these conditions, long QT, Brugada, CPVT, we typically think about those conditions as a bottom chamber rhythm issue, the ventricle. But it turns out that those diseases have a top chamber manifestation in the atria, and that top chamber manifestation is often atrial fibrillation. It is not an often manifestation. It's just that for the small subset, and that small subset is probably in the order of 5 to 10% of long QT patients, 5 to 10% of CPVT patients, probably higher of Brugada patients, 10% plus, will have top chamber rhythm issues called atrial fibrillation. But the therapeutic procedure of ablation, no incremental change in risk for your mother's ablation. And then Tanya is sharing how was probably misdiagnosed or thought to be seizures. And I see a baby being treated with propranolol. That's great. That medicine's also called Inderol, same medicine. And that's a great one for babies, especially in LQT1. And I made it to the bottom of the list. And let's see. And I would love to take it because he or she even gave me the pronunciation Putrea, if I did that right, or Putrea. And I'm going to take it real quick, just because they even pronounced it for me. Can a right bundle branch block be related to long QT? Almost never. Patients with long QT syndrome almost never have something called right bundle branch block, which for the most part isn't a big deal anyway if it's all by itself. more to unpack there. 16-year-old son shows a normal QT, but has right bundle branch block and an anterior MI. Well, it looks like we have work to do. 16 years old, anterior MI from the ECG. I suspect the ECG is electrically seeing things for which it's not making the correct interpretation. And that's a whole nother topic about the ECG is a great device, great invention. Eindhoven, 1903. I mean, we're talking 120-year-old invention almost, but it's not a perfect one. And many of you have seen that firsthand with the QT being horrifically mismeasured by the computer, sometimes measured poorly by the set of eyes then staring at it afterwards. And so, great device, but not a perfect device. Hopefully, there will be progress with things as we discussed earlier for monitoring. Well, we're at the top of the hour, and I wish you a great second to last weekend of April. And I can't wait to join you in 2 weeks. Next week, we'll be at Heart Rhythm Society. Maybe we'll put out some announcements of what we're learning there. And in 5 days, April 27, mark your calendar quick, April 27, Andrew Landstrom is coming back on for a SADS webinar for part 2 on his gene therapy discussion with you all at 7:30 p.m. Eastern time. And so don't miss that. And then we'll be back together here for SADS number 91 in 2 weeks. And then SADS number 92, 4 weeks from today with Dr. Shu Sanatani. Until then, be well, do not fear, live and thrive. And we'll all try to do that as well as we can. So until next time, blessings to you all.